Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Leprechaun Laboratory for our 1000 subscriber special. Now, thank you all for tuning in. Firstly, I have to say is 1000 subscribers, wow, is pretty wild. I'm absolutely stoked. A lot of people don't see it as such a big deal, but when I think about 1000 people jammed in a room watching my videos, potentially that is pretty wild to me. So definitely thank you for that. Now, I did ask on Instagram around what people would want me to do for a 1000 subscriber special, essentially. Basically, I gave everyone the option between a Q&A and a car history video. The overwhelming feedback was that people wanted a car history video. Basically, one bloke basically explained that why can't we have both? And well, we can. It's just that it loses all dramatic effect if I do both. But at the end of the day, we can do both. I will do both. I'm assuming that this video will probably bring up a fair few questions within everyone. So basically, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments. I will also be asking on Instagram. Basically, ask me anything, and I will try and sort of compile all the questions I get asked, put them all in a big list, and I will do a Q&A as well. And I'll do that basically as an extension of this video. So basically, to start off with this video, my car history, I would just like to explain that before me and Rex, either of us had our license or could drive on the road, we both wrecked a heap of wicked cars in the bush, just being absolute rat bags. Cars that if we could go back knowing what we know now, we would definitely have not wrecked them. But hey, that's just what happens. A few of these cars were basically a couple of Mitsubishi Sigmas, Corona wagon, Toyota Corona wagon, Triumph Dolomite, a Suzuki Sierra, which we ended up putting a roll bar in because we kept rolling it in the paddock. So, fair few cars in there that we just wrecked as bush bashes. I'm not going to get into too much detail about those cars. So I guess my first actually registered road-going vehicle was a gold 4-door Nissan N12 Pulsar sedan, and it was a pretty cool little vehicle, I gotta say. Had all the best first car mods, such as seat covers and floor mats, and you know, all that sort of stuff. Basically, I suppose you could say I learned to drive a lot in that car as far as road-going driving goes, I suppose. It was a cool little rig, but obviously another thing I'd like to point out is before I was ever into cars, I was a bike nut. Obviously a lot of my history comes from motorcycles. I was much bigger a motorcycle person than I was a car person at that point. So anyway, basically got to a point where I was about to get my I suppose my provisionary license, where I could drive my own. Obviously I was right into racing at that time. I was riding a lot, training a lot, and I really wanted a ute that I could use for riding, racing, going, taking my bike places. So anyway, I got rid of the N12 Pulsar sedan, bought a 1996 Holden Rodeo ute, single cab 4J B1 turbo diesel, and it was literally probably the best car I could have owned at the time. It was absolutely awesome. Massive big tray on it, being a single cab. I had it set up so well for to take my bike. Had a toolbox on it. Literally, I was flat out racing at that point, and it was the best car I could have had at the time. And that did me for quite a few years, just having that car. Ended up to the point where sort of ended up for a few reasons I decided to slow up on racing. Obviously, with the end of year 12 and school and that sort of thing getting in the way. Obviously, I was always into cars, but I didn't have one of my own. But I really decided at that point I really wanted to build myself or have a really cool cruiser for P plates. Obviously, provisional P plates in Queensland forbidden us from driving any V8s or anything super quick at the time. I wasn't allowed to drive a V8. I really wanted to build myself a cool H-series cruiser. We had already had the yellow 1-tonner. It already had the blown big block in it. And basically after a little while of me talking to a few dad and stuff and talking about it, we decided instead of building a whole new 1-tonner, basically a more cost-effective, easier method was that we'd pull the big block out of the yellow one, pull the 202 out of the LX Tirana, do up the 202, put the 202 in the yellow tonner, and I would drive that on the street. Because basically, the yellow one had the big block in it, but it was just sitting in the shed, wasn't registered. Dad was doing not much with it. Basically, it wasn't doing much. I really wanted a cruiser, so it just sort of worked well to do it that way. So basically what we did was pull the 202 out of the Tirana. It had a little high comp head on it, a few other things. We pulled down the Trimatic gearbox, shift kitted it ourselves. Me and Rex did all the work ourselves, shift kitted that. And that was one of our first, I suppose, experiences with auto gearboxes. Mind you, like all of the paint and panel that had been done on that car beforehand was all done by us as well. This is just obviously after I got my license. So again, that's stuff I'm not going to delve into at the moment. So anyway, we shift kitted this little Trimatic, built this little 202, jacked it in the tonner, and put it like a full closed bonnet on it, because obviously the blown big block had a bonnet hole in it. Put it all together, and basically Dad and I made the deal that I would trade him my little Rodeo ute for the tonner. I suppose another thing I should add is towards the end of this, obviously the Rodeo ute was awesome, I loved it, but me being a very tall, long boy, one of the biggest issues I had with the Rodeo was that I didn't fit very well in the car. Obviously it was not built for someone of my stature. I kept growing taller. So towards the end of it, obviously me getting the shits with it, I started driving around in Dad's, he had a 3F Toyota 80 series Land Cruiser at the time. Obviously the Land Cruiser you all know now as V80. At the time it was just a carbureted 3F 4 litre petrol. So it wasn't exactly mine, but I did drive that around for quite a bit. And then obviously once the tonner was built, I swapped Dad the Rodeo for the tonner, so then the tonner was mine. Along that same timeline and the same period, basically, Rex and Dad made a deal that Rex would get the 3F Land Cruiser because he wanted the Land Cruiser, plus the Tirana shell that we took the 202 out of, the LX Tirana shell, and Dad would swap him for the VX Commodore, plus I think there was some sort of money involved. I don't know anything about that. Had not much to do with me. Anyway, along the lines, Rex and Dad traded those two cars, the Tirana and the Land Cruiser for the VX. And basically Dad gave me the VX as a daily. And so then I had basically the tonner plus the VX. Dad got my little Rodeo ute. Rex got his two cars that he wanted. Everything was sweet. So for a while there, I basically dailied the VX Commodore and basically used the HX, yellow HX1 tonner as basically a little show car cruiser. It was a great little ute. That 202, we shift kitted it. The Trimatic was awesome, shifted really hard first to second. A little high comp 202 with a cane manifold and a 350 Holly. And it was a tough little rig. So I took it to a lot of car shows, got a heap of attention. Obviously when I built that motor, we painted it all up, put chrome covers all over it. Everything was absolutely A1. The thing was a really nice looking car. Also a very nice sounding car, had a really nice exhaust to it, really nice exhaust note, sounded really good. A lot of people thought it sounded like a 308. Everyone loved it. So yeah, that was cool. That was a really cool car to cruise around in my P's. I got to say, it was really nice. Obviously had the GDS dash, GDS wheel, Statesman seats. Everything about it was basically just a P-plater's dream at the time, as far as a H series ute goes. So that was awesome. Through this time, I ended up moving into a place at Currimundi, which was on the coast, like quite near to the beach. In that house, I moved in with a few blokes that were right into their 4Bs. I moved in with one bloke that had like an 80 series with big lift and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, I was always quite into four-wheel driving. Never really had something four-wheel drive myself. Dad also at this time had a TD42 GQ Nissan Patrol, so a full turbo diesel 4.2. Basically every other P-plater wanted that didn't have a tonner. So anyway, basically I was living in Currimundi. I wasn't really driving the tonner at all. I was away 5 weeks at a time for work, so I was 28 on, 10 days off, so I was away a lot. And the tonner was just sitting in Saltaire, copping it. I wasn't driving it. And basically I wanted a four-wheel drive. So I worked out again with Dad that I would basically trade him back the one tonner because that one tonner was never going to leave the family. We was never going to get sold out of the family. So me and Dad worked out that I would sell that, or not sell, I would trade that back to Dad for the GQ Patrol that he had. So that's how I ended up with my TD42 Turbo GQ Patrol. That was awesome. So used that, full drive around, drowned it, did all sorts of hectic stuff to it, and absolutely had a ball. Me and Rex had so much fun in that car off-roading in it. Obviously the biggest issue we had with it was that you couldn't seal the alternator or the starter as much as you could seal everything else. The alternator and starter were always exposed. Every time we drowned it in mud, the alternator and the starter would end up quitting. Anyway, so that went on for a while. At this point, I was sort of starting to get the shits with every time I'd come home from work, I'd be fixing my Patrol because I always wrecked it every time I was home. So like I'd spend the week before driving it and wrecking it, and then when I got home from work, I'd have to fix it. This really sort of gave me the shits, and I decided I really wanted to get something that was dedicated for off-roading and basically keep my Patrol for a daily or you know, a nicer car to drive that I didn't have to keep fixing every time. So I bought an XJ Jeep Cherokee because a mate at the time who I used to forward drive with had one that was really capable. I was really surprised with how it was stock. So I bought it and was like, yeah, I'll build this into a sick off-roader and I'll keep the GQ as just like a bit of a daily get around. That didn't last long. I ended up the Jeep that I got was pretty cheap. Obviously it was cheap because I needed a lot of fixing up. At the time I didn't have facilities like here and I didn't have the knowledge I have now, and obviously being a Jeep it was very expensive to get other people to fix, and I just didn't really have the time because I was working away 5 weeks at a time. So that didn't last very long. At the end of the day, basically the mate that I moved in with that got me into forward driving, who had the 80 series that was lifted and all that, he decided he wanted to sell his 80 series because he wanted to buy a van. So I decided I was going to sell the Jeep and buy his 80 series off him, which was a 4.2 litre injected petrol 1F, oh sorry, 4.5, the 1F said. So I bought that off him. Turns out I never ever actually sold the Jeep. I actually traded it for an exhaust system for one of the bikes I had at the time. But so I never sold that. But I ended up with the 80 series, his 80 series, and I thought the same thing. I'll do up the 80 series for off-roading, and I'll sort of do a bit of a daily deal on the GQ. At this time, my ex-girlfriend at the time was using my VX just as a daily, so that was sort of being used. So that went on for a bit, had the cruiser for a bit. Eventually one shifter come over from work, and I hadn't got the cruiser registered yet because a few plans had fallen through, and I had just gotten the shits. So I had these shits real bad. I got home from work, and I decided, nah, I'm done with fixing this GQ every time I come home. I'm done with working on these cars every time I come home. So I decided the next day I'd get a lift to the local Ford dealership, and went and bought, this is just after the new PX Ranger came out, the big Ford Ranger. I was 18, and they saw me coming from a mile away. That was a big mistake. But anyway, I just walked into the dealership and basically bought a brand new Ranger. So after that, I sold the 80 series that I bought off my mate, flogged it off, and my deal was basically use my GQ as a forward drive as I had been for the past couple of months or years or whatever, and I used the brand new Ranger as a daily. So basically that was my idea. That worked out for a little bit. After a while, I sort of basically just wasn't using the GQ. I had a mate that really wanted it, really good mate of mine, and he pretty much was like, oh yeah, I'll buy it off you. So sold the GQ to him. That was pretty much the end of that. I had the Ranger, Mrs. was using the VX. That went on for a little while, and then obviously like mid 2014 I had my accident where I'd completely destroyed my arm. This left me in a pretty bad state as far as work went, so I basically, as soon as I sort of came back to out of hospital and that, flogged off my Ranger, got rid of that. I bought the girlfriend at the time a Mazda 6, and I took back my Commodore, and I just started using the Commodore as a daily. And basically that's how I did that until sort of that injury and recovery was sorted somewhat. So anyway, that worked for a little while. Then obviously once I got back from my injury and I started to recover a bit, first thing I wanted to do was get back to racing, get back to riding at the time. So I really wanted to get another ute because I was dead set on going racing again, even though I just completely destroyed my arm. So anyway, I bought a XG Series 3. It was the last X Series ute before the AU, and it was like a Tickford XR6 XG. And I grew to love that ute quite a bit because it was a pretty rare ute actually. And as much as it was a bit of a beater, It was actually a very rare car and it was really nice to drive. So I ended up buying that, just sort of get back into it. Somewhere along sort of recently after I bought that, me and the girlfriend at the time decided we were going to move to Toowoomba. Basically at this time we were going to move to Toowoomba. My mate that I'd bought the GQ off me, he couldn't get the roadworthy that he'd thought, so he needed to pretty much offload this GQ because he'd sunk a bit of money into it with new tyres and that sort of thing, and fixing up a fair bit of issues with it, and it was not going to work out. And so at that point I decided I really wanted it back because it was still registered in my name, so it made sense. So I sold all my bikes at the time because we were moving to Toowoomba anyway. Sold all them, bought my GQ back. That'll work for a little while. Obviously at that point the VX Commodore was starting to get to a bit of a redundant point. Anyway, so we were just about to move to Toowoomba. I had no real plans for it to go there. It had pretty much become a redundant vehicle to me, and at this point I didn't have enough time really to sell it. No one really wanted it, so I sold that to a bloke that I was working with at the time for 300 bucks. So I sold him a perfectly good VX Commodore that pretty much road going, ready to go for 300 bucks. But anyway, I got rid of that. Moved to Toowoomba with my GQ and my Falcon. During the move, the Falcon got rear-ended and had to pretty much rebuild that. I paid Dad to completely rebuild the rear end of it because it got rear-ended, which was all sweet. Basically, was in Toowoomba like that for a little while. Went back to work from Toowoomba. At this point I was doing the daily commute from Toowoomba to Brisbane, back at work in Brisbane. So I was doing that every day, and it was, for one, in the Falcon it was costing me a fortune in fuel because the Falcon was very thirsty. Secondly, in the GQ was very problematic. Obviously had general TD42 heat issues, which most of them do, and it created a bit of an issue for me. So anyway, after a little while of doing this, and obviously giving up bikes, moving to Toowoomba, I decided I really wanted something that sort of filled that hole that bikes left in my basically hobbies list, as well as wanting something that was pretty fuel efficient, fun to drive, and would be like good as a daily commuter from Brisbane to Toowoomba every day. I had a pretty big soft spot for Subis, always have, so I ended up looking out for a Subi. I ended up buying a absolutely awesome GC8 Club Spec Evo 2 Menai Subaru, and it was a full forged Eagle rods and pistons, EJ257 crank, EJ20G, VF22 turbo, PBG straight cut first to fourth, STI 5-speed with an STI transfer case, STI diffs, STI basically everything underneath, STI full interior, white line sway bars, struts, braces, fender braces. The thing was absolutely off its dial. And the whole idea of it was that it had stock heads that were ported, a lot of port work on the standard heads, but with standard cams. And obviously fifth gear was still helical. So on the highway in fifth gear with the VF22 and the standard cams, it would just be off boost around 2200 RPM, basically just a standard 4-cylinder at fifth gear. The thing is, at fifth gear on the highway, I used to get 600 k's to a tank of 98 octane fuel, but obviously first through to fourth was straight cut and used to sound like an F1 car, and everything over 3 grand RPM was just absolutely on gate, off its face, and it was just the most fun car ever. So that happened. Basically ended up, after I bought that, a little while after I bought that, I got a call from basically Dad saying that Shane, the bloke who actually does all that tuning, he was looking for a TD42 T-Patrol. He wanted the motor for another car or something. For some reason or other, he wanted my Patrol. Dad called me on the morning that my washing machine shat itself. So I had a bung washing machine, no money, a Patrol that was sitting there doing nothing, and I sort of decided, look, yeah, whatever, he can have it. So basically sold that Patrol to Shane, which was really cheap at the time, but obviously that favour to Shane has repaid myself back tenfold in the favours he's done for me, so that worked out really good. But obviously if I had my time again, I definitely would have probably kept that Patrol, got it into a ute, done something with it, because they're worth so much money now. But anyway, at the time needed the money, that's what happened. So I did that. Then I just sort of ran the Subi and the Falcon for a little bit. At this point, Rex decided to write off his daily, which I'm not going to get into, but he basically wrote that off. Borrowed my Falcon Ute for a while. So he was borrowing the Ute. Literally all I had was the Subaru for like many a months. So I was down, for the first time since I was like 17, I was down to a single car, single rego, single insurance, 4-cylinder car, and it was awesome. So I really grew to love that. By the time Rex had got done with the Falcon, I pretty much didn't need it. I hadn't missed it, so I sold that. I ended up selling that to a bloke who really was looking for exactly that. He was really looking for an XG Series 3 XR6 Ute. He came down from Mackay and bought that off me, which worked out really well. So that went. So then I was pretty much back to just the Subaru. In this time I ended up buying a house in Toowoomba. After that, I really wanted to get another 4-wheel drive. Obviously I needed to do a few things with house renovations. I needed to be able to pick up supplies, that sort of thing. I really wanted another 4-wheel drive, so I ended up looking into buying another 4-wheel drive. I ended up buying another 80 series. I bought a 1HZ aspirated diesel 80 series, which was a pretty good rig. It was a good price at the time, a lot of Ks, and it was a pretty rattly piece of junk, to be honest, but it was a pretty good vehicle. So I bought that. Obviously the other thing, with the Subaru, driving from Brisbane to Toowoomba every day, or Toowoomba to Brisbane every day for work, I was racking up heaps of Ks on the car, and it was really taking its toll on me and the vehicle. Obviously it was full coilovers all around, all that sort of stuff. It was slammed, and it was rough as guts. So driving it every day was really taking its toll on me. It was a lot of Ks in the vehicle, so I really wanted a daily, a 4-wheel drive that was kind of cheap, so I wanted a diesel. Something that was cheap to get to and from work, didn't have to keep putting Ks in the Subi, and I could start doing house stuff that I needed to do. So then I ran both of those for like a few months. Then I ended up selling the Subaru because I needed the garage space, because the girlfriend at the time wanted a new car. So we bought a new BMW, well not a new, a second-hand BMW E92 320D BMW together, which was pretty cool. Put some wheels on it and that sort of thing. Literally like a couple of months later we split, and I got to say, literally the biggest regret of my life is selling my Subaru. I would do so many unspeakable things to have my Subaru back. Definitely should not have sold that. Big regret. But anyway, you get that. Got to live and learn, move on. So anyway, we split. I moved back to Brisbane. At this point I just had the Land Cruiser. Had that for a while. Literally that February, it was Valentine's Day. It was my first Valentine's Day signal in like my adult life, and I decided, look, I'm going to do something nice for myself. At the time I was actually really looking for a 32 4-door. I've always liked 32 4-doors, but ended up coming across, there was a fair few 31s for sale at a pretty good price, that were a pretty good deal. Ended up finding the one that I bought on that Valentine's Day, which was a sick deal, and it was like full Microtech LT8S, turboed RB30, KKR 660, which is like a Chinese GT35, it was manual, coilovers, the rotor wheels, like it's pretty much set up, and like for basically any indication, I bought that at the time for $4,000, which is basically what most people ask for like a tidy aspirated manual one these days. So it was very cheap at the time, couldn't pass it up, snapped it up. So I bought that, and I worked on just getting that on the road. So I just had that in the Cruiser for a while. During that time I ended up moving back up to the coast, which is where I was from originally. Moved in with a heap of friends there, and sort of fell in with a whole heap of old friends groups that I sort of had up there before. So once the 31 was on the road, I started driving it around the street a bit in the Sunshine Coast, and sort of meeting up with a whole heap of other people that I used to know that were into cars. And we used to go on cruises and do all that sort of thing, and it was sick. I used to have so much fun in that car. Absolutely awesome. Obviously, subsequently moving back to the coast, I was then doing the coast to Brisbane commute every day. And at the time I was dailying the 80 series again. Not really the most enjoyable daily. It was rattly, it was noisy, it was a piece of crap. And same thing where I just got home one day and I had this shit, and I just decided I'm going to get a new car to drive to work in. So at this point I lined up a new Navara NP23 or D23 Navara. Obviously I was much smarter than I was when I bought the Ranger, and I did my research, and I played the game and I was a lot better at it. I got a way better deal, and that thing was absolutely awesome. That Navara was easily one of the best cars I've ever owned. It did everything right. It was a good price, value for money, absolutely awesome. I rate it way higher than my Ranger was, as far as just value for money. Absolutely wicked. So then I started daily in that. I still had the 31 on the road at that point. I ended up selling the 80 series to a mate, very cheap, but he made good use out of it, so that's all right. Eventually ended up breaking the gearbox in the 31. At this point I decided it was time for it to come off the road. So anyway, 31 came off the road, everything was sweet. Basically just dailied the Navara and did everything with that for ages really. I ended up a little while after that, after I took the 31 off the road, I decided I was just going to turn it into a dedicated drift car. I ended up moving back to Brisbane. At that point, one of the blokes I was working with in Brisbane, he was selling his Tiger Mica VT SS, which obviously, as you have probably seen on the channel, I bought, is now the donor car for my Crusader motor and box. And if you watch the video that I made about it, which I'll put a link in right here, and I'll put one in the description, that's sort of all history as well, as far as you can see everything that went on with that car. But anyway, I ended up buying that. Literally like a week later, I also had at the time like a grand plan of getting into hill climbs and sprints and that sort of thing, and time trial races. And so I really wanted a car to do that. A bloke like literally just behind where I was living in Brisbane was selling a EK Civic hatch for real cheap, so I snapped that up. So I bought that as well, had that for a while, ended up moving back to the coast again. This is when I really started getting into drifting. After a while, basically decided I didn't have enough money to do racing and drifting at the same time. So I thought I had to pick one, so I chose drifting because I liked it better and it just worked out better. So I ended up selling the Civic, and then from there, pretty much everything's history. I think after that, it's pretty much everything's pretty much documented. Somewhere in there, obviously, when I was living somewhere between buying the Ranger and then selling the Patrol the first time, I bought the Volvo, which obviously you've all seen on the channel. It's an absolute beast, and that is, if you've seen the video of us building upstairs, Jake, Munted Mullet Jake. It took Jake and us around the country racing. It's an awesome rig, it's got some sentimental value to me, so bought that in there as well. There's a few things in there that I missed out as well, which basically just aren't a substantial thing to put in or didn't really hang around, like I basically just bought and sold or whatever. So yeah, basically apart from that, nothing worth mentioning really made it in there. So yeah, that's pretty much the history of my vehicles as far as road going vehicles goes. Obviously the Rodeo I sold Dad actually lived on till like last year. I think Dad actually, some bloke pulled out in front of him in town and he rode it off. But obviously this is just my cars. As you've probably heard from literally this video, is that me and Rex and Dad have always shared cars around. We've had a fair few cars that have been passed around. So this is just my cars that I've had, nothing to do with Dad or like Liam or Adam. They've got their own sort of stories, which I'll try and get for you if you are interested. But apart from that, that's pretty much my 1,000 subscriber car history. The rest of it is history, as you can see if you go back to my channel, from my Sylvias to my F-Truck to selling the Navara and then buying the Falcon and then the 3 Crusaders I've had. It's all been documented from here on out. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Go back and watch if you'd like to see the rest. That's everything from before then. As I said, I'm sure that after this video, more than ever, people probably have questions. So if you have a question, drop it in the comments below. I will do a Q&A answering pretty much all your questions as soon as I can. And I will also do a few like questionnaires on Instagram and put them in the video as well. Try and do a decent Q&A video. So as always, again, thank you for watching, guys. Cheers for tuning in. Thank you all for 1,000 subscribers. Absolutely wicked. And I will see you all later on in the week. Peace.